Happy to see you all.
Welcome, Venerable Robina. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to introduce you to Venerable Robina. Could you imagine serving your lamas and devoting your life to the teachings? Venerable Robina has served her gurus, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, since the 1970s. As editorial director of Wisdom Publications, editor of Mandala magazine, executive director of the Liberation Prison Project, plus more. Venerable Robina shares her insight and inspiration to carry us deeper into the path by her teachings, compiled and edited books, podcasts. And actually, please, if you can, check out her Something to Think About. It's her short 1 minute 55 teachings posted on Instagram and Facebook. Last week's was great, 81 on grief and loss. So anyway, we're so fortunate. Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Good, darling. Happy to hear, Mary. All of you darling people, some of you in England, God Almighty, 1 a.m, you people, you're so fanatic. There's Anna. It's what? 2 a.m. in London, in Liverpool. Good Lord, Anna. And any other of you there, can't believe it. So we make the most of this time together, this hour and a half. We are 2 hours. What is it? 2 hours or hour and a half? 90 minutes, yeah. And then we've got the weekend. So we're thinking we're going to listen to these teachings, think about how to live our lives so we know how to die, so we know how to continue to the next life. Why? So that we can develop our amazing potential, unbelievable potential. That's what Buddhism really is, so unique in the way it describes our extraordinary mental potential. So for our sake, so we can be of benefit to ourselves, so we can be of benefit to others. So Mary's going to offer a mandala. So we think this mandala, what it means is mandala, you see those pictures, you see those round drawings. They're really just architectural drawings of the abode of all the different Buddhas. This is certainly from the tantric point of view. So a mandala is just your own, where you live. So this is really just describing, well, it's according to Buddhist cosmology, we didn't know that Mount Meru was in the middle of our continent, did we? We didn't know there were 4 continents. We didn't know this. I mean, the sun and the moon, excuse me, I have to cough. Certainly didn't know, did we, that our sky is blue because it's reflecting off lapis lazuli. I mean, isn't that a nice idea? You didn't learn that in astronomy or geology or geometry or whatever it was. Anyway, never mind. Just think, if you don't know the contents of our world as we know this world, we just think of all the marvelous things that people use, which is the meaning, the world that we live in. We just imagine piling up all the gorgeous things and offering it to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. It's got very nice meaning. Okay, Mary. And if you know the mudra of the universe, you can do that. Mary.
Sajipu ki jushing meto chamri rablingji ni degen padi Sangye jindu mi te uwahi Droku nam dak jingla Choparsho, a holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niyatayami.
All right, my dears. So now I will lead this little prayer. And as we know, as always, the first 2 lines are expressing our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings, just reminding us, for those of us who have committed. And the second 2 lines stating this marvelous aspiration that we said before, we're going to listen to this advice so that we can become a Buddha eventually, in whatever lifetime it is, so we can be a benefit to others. This is our long-term goal. Sangye charang soke chognam la janchu baru dagni kyabsu chi dagi chernyen gi pesonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok Sangye Chadang Soke Chognam La, Jang Tru Baru Dagni Kyab Suchi, Dagi Chonyen Gipe Sonam Ki, Drola Penche Sangye Dropa Shok. Sangye Chadang Soke Chognam La, Jang Tru Baru Dagni Kyab Suchi, Dagi Chonyen Gipe Sonam Ki, Drola Penche Sangye Dropa Shok. Okay, so what's marvelous these days, I've seen this all around the world, you know, there are really wonderful human beings working now, choosing to work among the dying. You know, it's like they're electing to do that. I remember a wonderful conference in Australia in some country town, you know, and these wonderful young nurses and doctors, people really wanting to work with the dying. I was very moved by it, you know. I remember especially one time going giving at a conference, giving a talk at a conference at a big children's hospital in Sydney. And there's a wonderful human being, this man, the doctor who ran the unit, he called this conference, you know, and it was for the children. And he looked and he showed us, put the dead babies and the dead children, and it was decorated like a nursery, and it was open. You know, and the siblings, the little brothers and sisters of the dead child, they would kind of walk in and out of the morgue, come and meet my dead brother. So opening up, so it was so moving because we know there's unbelievable fear around the concept of death, you know. I mean, of course, in the world, there are so many views of what might happen when you die. And we know, of course, the prevailing view in the world, the philosophical materialist view, absolutely states we're just the body, and then when you die you're dead, you know. And so clearly I can see in these different conferences I've taken part in is that the main purpose behind these conferences, of course, is to help the mothers and the fathers and the children and the people who are working, who are going through this process of their dying loved one. But it's about the loved one, helping them die peacefully, but it's about the whole environment of the people. So it's all about handling your grief. So then what is it? What's the most important one then for the Buddhist view? Well, this is quite precise, it's quite distinct, you know. And so the Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, which we're using as our basis, and so the course notes that I prepared for you that are in the chat, you know, please, I really encourage you to get them. There's one that's formatted for the phone and one formatted for your tablet. It's from Lama Zopa's book. It was published initially. We did it very first. In fact, Mary worked as the graphic designer. This is several years ago. Mary and I worked together, and we prepared it as a PDF for the FPMT office, and it was given away. It was given away free, you know, and it was then called, which is very typical Lama Zopa approach, How to Help Your Loved Ones Enjoy Death so that they go happily to their next rebirth, which is exactly the point of the book. Okay, now that's another version. So it's a bit complicated. And then Wisdom took it up and they published that version, which is called How to Enjoy Death. They shortened the title. But that I have to say, yeah, wait a minute, go back to the previous one. Mary, show us the previous one. Not trying to be against anybody, but I don't recommend this one because they re-edited it and made it quite a mess. So luckily, a couple of years later, put that one down now, the red one, now we've got this one, and this is the one that's most like the original one we did, and this is the one I highly recommend you buy. It's called they've now called it How to Face Death Without Fear, which is a good title, nothing wrong with that. So it's basically taken from all of Lama Zopa's teachings over the last 40, 50 years, given in all these random places, you know, and we, of course, being a book, you put it in a coherent way, and it's a dress. I mean, of course, the advice is for oneself. But you know, if you're lying on the bed dying, you can't exactly pick up the book and see what's the next thing to do. So we obviously, the whole book is addressed to how to help your loved ones die. But the implication is obvious. It's how to help us die. And so, of course, when you learn that, when you know how to live your life and then how to die, then you know how to help your loved ones, including your pussy and your doggy woggy, you know, including the little mouse, including the little ant, including all sentient beings. So it's really a handbook, and it's taught in a kind of chronological order. You know, there's a bit of background in the first parts, and then parts 3, 4, 4, and 5, I think. They're all about, you know, what to do the months and weeks before death. what to do the days before death, what to do the hours before death, what to do at the time you stop breathing, what to do the time the mind leaves. It's step by step by step. And it's all the information there together. And then really the last 2/3 of the book is all the practices that Rinpoche recommends endlessly throughout the book. So initially it's quite confusing, but all the practices are there, all numbered from 1 to 87. There are 87 distinct different practices throughout the different process that you can utilize, But as Lama Zopa says in this book, even if you just do one practice, if you just do the medicine Buddha mantra, good enough. So of course, because it's a Buddhist book, it's not just about how to help the family and the loved one kind of come together and die without fear. It's about the key one, and this is the key point, the implication behind all of this advice. And you'll see this 1,000 times when you read it. And the course notes I prepared for you are extracted from this book. It's all about how to die well and why, and this is the point, why from the Buddhist point of view do you want to die well? Not just to make your loved ones happy, not, we can visualize a person on the deathbed smiling and making friends with all their family and all the family there loving each other, and then the auntie or the grandmother or the mother dies peacefully. That's how we visualize it, and that is as much as anything for our sake. So, of course, because of the Buddhist view, it's all for the benefit of the dying person. I kind of joke and say it's their gig. And everything in this book is to help the dying person. Everything in this book is for the benefit of the dying person. So I remember when I had the manuscript ready, because I edited the book, and I wasn't quite sure if it was finished. So I showed it to a couple of friends. And one Buddhist friend said, well, where's the chapter on grief? Well, I said, well, that's fine. That grief is for you. But this is not helpful for the dying person. Grief is that's your business. That's another book. This is for the dying person. And everything in this book, all the advice is solely for the purpose of helping the dying person die well, so that because it's quite specific, and we're going to go into this, it's quite technical. As we know from the Vajrayana teachings, there are these detailed descriptions of the actual death process. Very encouraging to know that at least someone has a view of what happens step by baby step. This minute, then that, then this, then that. What happens when they stop breathing? How long does the mind stay in the body? When does the mind leave? What happens after the mind leaves? I mean, it's interesting because Buddhism has all this information, and it's mainly Vajrayana Buddhism. You wouldn't hear the same advice at a Zen center. You wouldn't hear the same advice at a Theravadan center, because this is Tibetan, and Tibetan is Vajrayana. So it's got detailed descriptions, and the key point is this. This is the key point. Time of death, as the death process starts, and that's what we're going to be describing as much as anything, it's described in terms of 8 stages, and it usually starts a couple of hours before you stop breathing. Once that process starts, and it's, like I said, described in terms of 8 stages, about the 2nd or the 3rd of those stages is when various other things happen, things kick in, and then that is the point at which the karmic seed in the mind of the person dying, and we're going to go into this, that will determine the next life for that person. It's at that point that karmic seed is triggered. And this is the basis of all the book. As you know, being a Tibetan Buddhist or hearing about Tibetan Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism, I mean, it's all Buddhist teachings that the mind continues. The mind comes from one life and goes to another. But as I said, it's most kind of expressed most deeply. The technical experience of it is described in great detail in the We're going to discuss this, karma, the cause, let's say, of us getting a human life, human body. It's not just some good luck. There's no creator in Buddhism. It's not just a random event. And father are just the catalyst. They hopped into bed and their egg and sperm joined together. But the cause for us, for consciousness, to go to that mother's particular fallopian tube, to join that particular father's sperm and the mummy's egg, is directly the result of one's own actions. And so the cause of getting a decent human life is a past karmic seed as a result of non-killing. So really, to understand the death process, we've got to understand how we create karma, because karma is the cause of the kind of life we have, and indeed even the cause of the kind of death we have. And so the key point is we want a most delicious, a strong, intentional, rich karmic seed of non-killing from the past that's in the bank vault of that human mind, we're going to describe all this, to be triggered at that moment. So when that karmic seed is triggered, if it's going to be in our but we can deduce logically that at that time of past death, not more than 7 weeks before we found our way to our present mummy's human womb, one of our virtuous karmic seeds from our own past spiritual practice of non-killing, practiced, no doubt, as Lama Zopa says, in the context of keeping vows of non-killing, within the context of a spiritual practice, at the time of death, that seed, before we even stop breathing in the past life, that karmic seed was triggered, and then we were already programmed a few weeks later to go to our present mother's human womb. It's a very precise, detailed, technical process, and it's very fascinating. And so the point is, the causes of having a conducive death, of having one of those karmic seeds be triggered at the time of your death, is as much as your own spiritual practice. But because death is so fearful for most people, I mean, and because most people aren't aware of the process, one of the most important, most powerful jobs we can do is to help someone die well. As Lama Zopa says, if you want to help anybody in their life when they need you most, is actually at that process, at the time of death. It's like you're helping a person navigate a 10-lane freeway where all the traffic's going 100 miles an hour, and you've got to get them across to the other side. I mean, I'm just using an analogy, and why death is so painful, and why death is so difficult for people, and why it is difficult for an appropriate karmic seed to be triggered, is because most people die with fear. No one likes to think of death. We can't stand the thought of death. We assume that death in its nature is fearful. We put off thinking about it, even though in this room, look at us, most of us are old, knowing that we're closer to death than birth. Every day we're getting closer to death, but absolute certainty we do not believe we're going to die. And this is, we know from the Lam Rim, one of the first teachings that we learn in the Lam Rim, entry-level junior school grade 1, is to learn about impermanence. And not even subtle impermanence. That you need to get single-pointed concentration to realize subtle impermanence, but the obvious, in-your-face, gross impermanence that, guess what, honey, you're going to die. But even though we technically know it, we intellectually know it, everybody would be embarrassed to pretend that you're not going to die. We all know it, but this shows how deep the delusions are, We're going to need to talk about this. So in other words, because, as Lama Zopa calls it, we keep grasping at permanent me. It's so primordial, and we can link that to deep primordial attachment, and we come into this life program with these tendencies. So because we've got enormous attachment, and the thing we're most attached to, even though we don't realize it, is me. And then at the time of death, as Lama Zopa says, the main thing we are terrified of losing, because we identify with this body, because that's what we see and touch and smell and identify with, this me is this body. The greatest fear at death is attachment to this body. Being there, This is why death is so painful for most people, and this is the point. The condition that's crucial in order to trigger a virtuous karmic seed, a karmic seed of past non-killing, for that to be the one that is triggered before you even where we can help. The karmic seeds can be there, but if a person is living in some ugly old people's home, there are so many, it's so tragic these days about how we put all the old people to their, treat them like vegetables, drugged out of their brains, in old people's places. No one's helping them die. Probably the cleaning lady probably is the kindest person to them. I mean, I'm not being rude, but it's tragic. It's about the worst condition possible. It's like asking a child to walk across a freeway. It's too complicated. It's too difficult. We need to help people. Your pussy and your dog as well, the ant, the mouse. There's so much we can do to help at that time for a karmic seed to be triggered. In other words, our major job is to help the person. There, people, hear me? Because my Wi-Fi went off. You can all hear me, can you?
Venerable, it's intermittent. It's been
Okay,
intermittent.
I know, because my Wi-Fi just went off, but you can hear me now. Good, okay. So it's real. So then, as Lama Zopa says, the time a person needs you most is at that time of death. Even if you're a really good practitioner all your life, it still can be quite difficult at the time of death, you know? I mean, for just one example, you could be even a really nice place, very peaceful, but because when you're dying, your mind gets incredibly fragile, your mind gets incredibly sensitive. So the tiniest noise could be so distressing that it can throw you completely and make you freak out, you know? So it really is quite a difficult time, and it's a very sensitive time. And I mean, this is one of the things we're going to talk about, that one of the chapters is what is most conducive environment for a person to die. It's very specific. And it's not how we think in our culture, you know? I mean, for example, if your grandma's in a coma, we think, oh, she's unconscious, she can't hear anything, so we chat and gossip in her room, and there's clanking and noises. No, you've got to have incredibly peaceful. The only sound should be the sounds of Dharma, of prayers, because they are the only things that can help a mind at that time. There's these different things we're going to talk about, okay? So the bottom line is, the basis of all the advice in this book of Lama Zopa's is for a person to be in an appropriate condition, totally peaceful, at the time of death, and as the death process starts, for a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered, these conditions need to be so excellent. And then once the karmic seed is triggered, then you keep the place peaceful. And once they stop breathing, it could be up to 3 days before their mind stops, before their mind leaves the body. So there's all this advice about what to do after the breath stops, you know, when the mind leaves, all of which, of course, is not how we think in the modern world, not how we think in the materialist world, you know. It's quite specific advice, and we all need it. And just by reading it can calm you down, because now you have a sense of what to do. You know what to do. And of course, when you know how to help others, of course, you can totally help yourself, and you know how to get the right environment for you when you're going to die. This is the whole point, you know. And of course, having knowledge is what cuts fear. Fear comes because we're ignorant, whatever it might be about. You know, that's what so much fear is, because we don't understand this or that. Well, here, the death process, and this is what's so marvelous about the Tibetan tradition, there's such extensive knowledge coming from these great yogis, you know, direct experience about exactly what happens at the time of death. It's really so helpful, I tell you. And it's so funny, because when I worked on this book, it was like, you know, I've been a Buddhist for a few years. Yeah, I know about impermanence. Yeah, I know I'm going to die, blah, blah, blah. But I can't tell you, it really became like I got a particularly strong feeling from after editing this book. Sort of it dawned on me that it's up. This is one of the points I want to talk about this, you know, now, about karma. So before we even get to the death process, we've got to learn to live our lives. I mean, because one way of really preparing yourself for death is to live a perfect life. I mean, as Lama Zopa says in this book, you know, if someone's there's one chapter on, you know, if you just practice loving kindness, if you spend your life just being loving and kind and peaceful and generous and forgiving, and we're not even with much of a spiritual practice, your death will be joyful. And this is what's interesting. The way the Lamas talk, and Lama Zopa talks about this, if a negative seed is triggered at the time of your death because of so much fear, and we've got millions of karmic seeds in our little bank vaults, if the mind is distressed, that's the condition that will trigger a negative seed to ripen. If the mind is peaceful, and that's our job to help the person navigate this, then that can trigger a virtuous karmic seed. And it's very evident, Lama Zopa says, that if a negative seed has been triggered before the person even stops breathing, it's very clear by looking at the way the person behaves that you know that a negative seed has been triggered, because as they're going through the process of death, the mind gets more subtle and more subtle, and it's literally like they're seeing their future life. And so when you have descriptions of people for whom a negative karmic seed has been triggered and they're going through the death process, death is a really extremely terrifying experience. And we just think they're having visions, but they're literally, because their mind is getting more subtle, they're seeing their future suffering life. But a person for whom a virtuous karmic seed is triggered, literally they are joyful. There's a friend of mine, an Australian fellow, this is back in the 70s in Vajrapani Institute in California. One Australian guy who was married to one of the women there. they were the first lot of students, he was working on the roof of the Gompa or something, and he fell off, and he's dying, and he's in the arms of his wife. And she said he was radiantly joyful. So that means that virtuous karmic seed was triggered. And as his mind's getting more subtle, he's literally, because when your mind gets more subtle, that's when your mind's more powerful. Like, we can't see anything. We can't see any future or any past because we're living at a very gross conceptual level. But that's why many people have visions in their dreams. They have clairvoyant experiences because your subtle mind is capable of that. So as your mind is getting more subtle, you're literally seeing your future. So if a virtuous karmic seed is triggered and it's going to cause you to take a happy rebirth, your life, that Lama Zopa says it, your death will be joyful. And then if it's a negative seed that's triggered, your death will be terrifying. You know, people report this, people's own experiences of seeing people who are dying. You know, so there's descriptions of all this. So, but that's one way to describe the death process itself and how to die then, how to die well and how to help at death, but also how to live our lives. So let's just talk about that for a second now, you know. So we know, don't we, very well from the Lam Rim, like I said before, the very first entry, the very first teaching in the first part of the Lam Rim is to think about impermanence, and not just general impermanence, but specifically to think about death. So why does Atisha and why does the Lam Rim get us to think about death? Because it is impermanence, but you can talk about impermanence of relationships. You can talk about impermanence of computers and things. But Atisha wants us to give us a wake-up call. His agenda is to give us a wake-up call that, yes, you learn about impermanence, Buddha's first teaching, but he wants us to get a wake-up call to realize this precious life will end at any moment. So, of course, we can't stand thinking like this because we think they're trying to make us scared, are they? No, we're just trying to face reality. I mean, one of Buddha's key points, as we know very well, is that we suffer because we're living in La La Land. We suffer because of delusions. We suffer because we're not in touch with reality. So this is the very first one. And all the lamas say, even just really beginning to get some realization of the reality of impermanence already can transform your life. Because the implication of this, the recognition that I am impermanent, that I could die today, and as Lama Zopa says, it's best to think I will die today, isn't that you are afraid. It's the exact opposite. That suddenly you get this sense of urgency, that you realize there's no time to waste. And I think we can understand this. I use all sorts of simple examples to show us. I mean, let's just think, you know. I always joke about this, actually. Years and years ago, I remember I used to go off when I was living at Land of Medicine Buddha in California, and it's in the redwoods, and people adore the redwoods, but for me they're so big and you can't see the sky, you know. And in the winter it's all drippy and wet, and I can't stand all the drippy wet, you know. So I remember somebody offered me a place in Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico is considered one of the happiest places on the planet, and they really were happy people, I tell you. I'm sure there are murderers there as well, but never mind. Just really wonderful, joyful people. So there's a center there, and the Yangtze Rinpoche invited to their center. And then a friend found me a place on the south of the island, little baby island, 4 million people. And of course, it's in the middle of December. So it's divine, lovely sun shining, 70, 80 degrees every day. And it's right on in this kind of resort, a little pink building in this resort, just next to the beach. I could hear the beach about a minute away. And of course, I love the beach, you know. So and I had 9 weeks, and I was going to do one of my editing retreats. Wasn't this book, it was another book. So I was in heaven, the thought of going for 9 weeks, this lovely sunny place in Puerto Rico. So this is my example. So I had 9 weeks. I had a deadline. Good word, deadline. So our life, we have a deadline, but we don't know when it is. And that's number 2 point. We'll go into this. But this is the point that's so obvious. It was delicious, this lovely place. And so this is the point. Every single day I was there for that 9 weeks. Every day I'd look at the calendar and I'd go, oh my God, one less day, one day closer to 9 weeks finishing. So you have a real sense right there, this event, it's 9 weeks long, it's delicious. And I never forgot for 1 second that after 9 weeks, I'd have to go. But in our lives, we are so ridiculous because we can't stand to realize we've got to leave this house. And that's all it is a house. We act as if it's permanent. We know we're going to die, but we pretend we are not. And this is the point. Imagine if I'd forgotten that I had only 9 weeks and I started to get attached to it. And this is my little house. And then I had neighbors who were rude. Then I wanted to sue the neighbors. Then I want to start painting painting the walls. And for God's sake, I was going to leave in 9 weeks, you know? So when you realize something's impermanent, when you realize something's not going to last long and it is delicious, you don't just go, well, what's the point of, you know, like, for example, we go, well, if things are impermanent, then why do I bother doing it? Because we have an assumption it shouldn't be impermanent, but everything's impermanent. So because because it was only 9 weeks, I didn't waste a single second. That's the point. But because we think our life will last forever, and because if we get depressed, then all we do is we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. We think about all the misery. We argue with our grandmother. We resentful, bitter, because we forget that it's going to end at any minute. And the interesting point is, let's just say I got this apartment. I can't think of the lady. Rita, I think, was the lady who was the agent. Let's say she gave me the key to this apartment, this lovely place. Said, Robina, you can have this as long as you like, but I can come at any time and ask you to go. That's the best way to think about death. As Lama Zopa says, it's best to think you're going to die today. And that is a horrific idea to us. I remember a woman she talked about on the class, she lived in fear of her husband dying every day. What should I do? I said, well, face the fact that he will die, and it could be today. And you don't get fear from that. What you get is, I mustn't waste it. You make the most of every day. And that's exactly how it was for this apartment. I had a sense of priority. I didn't start painting the walls, suing the next door neighbors. I didn't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I can't be bothered swimming today. I'll go tomorrow. And before you know it, you're lying in bed every day. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. No, because you realize there's hardly any tomorrows left. So when you realize you're impermanent, when you realize, even if you do have a long life, there's no time to waste. So you get a sense of urgency. I mean, another example I use from my own mind. You know yourself that every time you go somewhere, let's say you have to drive to work every day. Okay, these days we don't drive to work, we stay at home, but one day we might drive to work again. And you know, it's a 20-minute journey. Think of this, there's a very vivid experience, isn't there, of moving forward. You see the different signs, there's that light, there's that house, and you get a feeling of moving away from your home and towards the office, and you get a sense of moving closer. Each second, there's quite a vivid feeling of moving forward. But look at our life. We wake up every morning with the same feeling as if I'm the same person as yesterday, as if I'm not a day older. So we should be feeling that we're moving towards death. I mean, we don't have to talk about it like that because people think you're depressed, but it's true. And what death simply means is not just some oblivion. If you're a materialist, the best you can think of death is you're going to fall into a black hole. And no wonder we're afraid, you know. Well, we don't have that view in Buddhism. We know that. And you're a Christian, for example, at least as a Christian, you know, you look forward to heaven. There's something to look forward to. And this is an interesting point. We'll go into it in the weekend. What we can use our attachment, you know. So the thing is, this sense of urgency, when you have and you've got to tell yourself every day, because it's not natural, the instinct to grasp at permanent me is very primordial. Even though we look in the mirror and we know there's an old wrinkled person there, but we don't want to think about it because we don't. And we even say things like, oh, I feel like death when you're sick. And then another day you'll say, I feel so alive. What's that got to do with anything? It's just fantasy, you know, feeling. I mean, we've got to really change the way we think about it. And when you get the sense of impermanence, because we are impermanent, and look back at history, it's everybody on the universe dies, but we don't learn it. We can't bear to think about it. Then when we get a sense of urgency, and the urgency is because you understand karma, and this is the crucial point. If you don't have the view of karma, if you think life's just a waste of time and you don't realize that everything you think and do and say produces the person you become, this is a vital one to understand. We'll discuss this the weekend. Then you've got a real sense that every single second counts. Every second counts. And if I could die today, then how do I want to be at the time? How do I want to be, you know? At the end of the day, if I have to die at the end of the day, I want to be ready. I want to be ready, you know? I want to be ready, have my bag packed and ready to leave that apartment. But if I forgot that I had to leave that apartment and Rita comes in and drags me screaming out the front door because I forgot it was impermanent. And then this practical point is this is the practical point. And it is really practical. This is what I really got from working on this book. It's not some esoteric thing. It's practical. When you have confidence in karma and rebirth, you know, and you've got to that takes time. That, you know, you've got to have your bag ready to go. I mean, I had to know the day I was going to die and know the day I was going to leave the flat, the apartment. At least you get a date there. And you know, your bag is ready. You're looking forward to. So you're not just going to walk out the door and sit in the gutter and get depressed. What do I do next? This is the point I'm getting at. That you prepare. I had my airplane ticket. I was going to go to Boston. I had my bag packed and my airplane ticket. So I moved out of the apartment. I said, thank you, Rita, gave me the key, and I kept moving. I knew where I was going. That's how we have to think. That's the meaning of death. Death isn't some oblivion. Death is moving to another body. I had to move to another apartment. I had my air ticket. I was ready. I was packed, ready to go. That's the attitude. That's the point. Not just think of, oh, death, death, death. I'm going to relax with death. No, you relax with death when you know your bag's packed, ready to go. So how do you do that? That's abiding by the laws of karma. You sow all the seeds that will ensure that your death will be good and that you will get another decent mummy and move on with your spiritual practice. We need that kind of confidence. So, of course, in our materialist culture, we don't think that way. This really takes practice. It really takes thinking and reading and getting past all the fears, you know, and having this confidence. And of course, that's up to us to have the confidence. I mean, we're not clairvoyant, so we can't see it's definitely true. But if we have good teachers and good sources and good teachings, we can take it as our hypothesis and we can act as if. I mean, there's no harm. Let's say Buddha's wrong and you're going to turn into dust when you die. Well, there's nothing to lose by living a good life. I mean, you can say it that way in a very negative way. There's nothing to lose at all. But if Buddha's right, you're ready, honey. You'll by the time you stop breathing, you'll be happy. You will have practiced all your life. You would have understood impermanence. You would have been living in your vows, creating bucket loads of good karma. A virtuous seed, karmic seed will be triggered. You have a happy death. They leave your body in peace. Your mind goes on and finds your next mummy. It's programmed. You create the cause for that next mother. It's not some random event. That's what's shocking to hear. And that's what really struck me again working on this book, that I'm the one who's got to create the cause for my next birth. You see, the feeling we have, even as Buddhists, I hear many times people say, what kind of rebirth do you want? Oh, I don't mind, whatever's best. So it's sort of like we're crossing our fingers and kind of rather hoping, well, Lama Zopa will take care of me, I'm sure. Well, that's like treating him like a creator. It's like saying, where would you like to go for a holiday? Oh, whatever's best. As if someone's going to come along and give you the airplane ticket. I'm sorry, you've got to buy your own airplane ticket. You've got to decide what country you want to go to. So you've got to decide, you want to be a boy, a girl, what country. You can be precise. I'm not joking. Karma's a law. Karma's a natural law. What kind of garden do you want? Oh, whatever's best. I'm sorry, that's not going to help you. You've got to know what seeds you want to plant now based on what you want in your garden. So what kind of life do you want? I mean, this is very funny to us. But this is how we have to think. And then you're more confident. When you know what's going on and you understand the law and you feel like you're ready, then karma takes care, as Lama Yeshe says, you know. Then you will live your life relaxed. You'll be aware of death. You'll wake up next morning. If you do wake up, like I said to this woman, make the most of your husband. He might die today. And if you wake up in the morning, he's still there, then it's a bonus, isn't it? You know. So if you wake up in the morning, you go, wow, I can't believe it. My petrol tank of morality hasn't run out yet. That's the way to think when you wake up in the morning. And that really is true. Karma is this, it's like putting gas in the tank. It really is. Something lasts as long as the karma lasts. You know, your garden, the fruits last as long as the strength of the seeds and the conditions. So life is like that. Life is like that. If we have a long life, that's the result of non-killing. That's the experience similar to the cause of non-killing. And the environmental result of non-killing is you're healthy. You know, so you have a long life. So this is karma. We have to be in charge of this process. This is very beneficial, very powerful, I tell you. So the way to live our life then, to prepare for death, is to live, if you're a Buddhist, is to live in vows, you know. Live in the power of vows is so amazing. The karma you create just by living in vows really gets you ahead of the game, especially living in vows of not killing, not stealing, not lying. You know, the karma you create every second is so delicious and so powerful. And you live within the reality of impermanence. And then recognizing the reality of your death when it comes. And of course, if you're fortunate, you'll die, you'll die slowly. You'll get old, you'll get sick, and then you'll be able to prepare for death. That's the best way to die. I mean, one of our things in our culture, because we can't stand the thought of death, people often say, well, I'll rather die in my sleep so I don't know about it. Because there's no sense of karma. There's no sense of creating the cause. You just think you're falling into a black hole. So to be ready for death, and then to live your life with the reality of it, and then you'll face it when you're sick and old, and you will be able to be prepared. You'll do all the practices, I mean, so many of my friends who've died already, same age as me, some younger, been given advice from Lama Zopa, and you can see it. There's a shift. I mean, some of my friends on death row as well. I remember we had a fellow on death row a few years ago. I think Venerable Amy took care of him, but he knew me, so I had a phone call with him. Remember John Castello here, he helped me get the phone call organized. I was in another country, so we had to have me on Skype, and then John was on the phone, so I had to shout through the Skype through the phone. But this fellow, he had like a few days to live. He was totally, completely focused on nothing else but being ready for that death. His mind was joyful. Nothing else. I mean, he really did he was on death row, and he had a date. And you could genuinely say he'd realized impermanence. So nothing else mattered to him. Everything was to have him ready. He had his practice clear. He knew exactly what he was going to do at the time he was going to die, This is very powerful. And his mind was joyful. His mind was happy, Because you've got to remember that fear is coming from ignorance. Fear of anything comes from ignorance, not knowing the facts, When you don't have ignorance, there is no fear. So just living your life, first of all, in this appropriate way, practicing morality, living in your vows, and recognizing the logic of karma, that every millisecond of what you think and do and say programs you. And you want everything to be programmed so that at the time of death, your mind is joyful, the condition is perfect, you have your practice, and you really are able to die well. I mean, this is marvelous. This is the ideal. This is the perfect one, So we're going to go into all of this over the weekend. What time is it? 7:45. 17. Yeah. So this is an overview, We're going to go into all of these details. So if there's any particular questions now you'd like to ask me, and I can go into more detail now as a prelude to tomorrow. Are there any questions? And we're going to cover it all. So probably your question, you'll get all the answers tomorrow. Yes, Mary.
Robina, there's a question in chat, and the person would like to be anonymous.
Okay.
Here, I'll read it. It's a little bit long. Tibetan texts often talk extensively about the horrors of the lower realms. I know they're supposed to encourage practice, but I'm already terrified of death. So these teachings actually paralyze me, make me more attached to this life, and even more afraid to die.
I understand.
And hold on,
I understand. So that's your question is assumed, is it? Or is there more to say?
There's more. It says, because I know I'm not perfect and I'm unlikely to be perfect by the time I die, could you please advise us how to be less afraid, even as an imperfect practitioner?
I understand. Exactly. I do understand. I know this really does freak us out a lot in our culture. I really understand that, isn't it? But I think there are really good examples in our own daily life that show us that they can be learning from it. But I mean, so for example, you go to your doctor and you're addicted to smoking. My sense is that your doctor will tell you the disadvantages of smoking, which means is she will maybe, and I mean, you watch these videos, you watch movies, I remember in Australia, one other thing, I remember in Australia, not about smoking, there was a big campaign of advertising on the television about driving, drunk driving, or about driving too fast because of all the car accidents and people dying. And it was very scary advertisements, but they were very powerful advertisements showing the consequences of driving drunk, children dying. They showed, and it was very well designed, very well put together advertisements. in other words, showing the consequences of doing negative actions. Well, they said the campaign was incredibly successful. It gave people a wake-up call. So, I mean, honey, we are all the same. We are all like that. But our trouble is because we have this very powerful ego grasping, that then intense attachment and then intense guilt based upon your words. I understand, you know that we feel we are like a nightmare, and then someone tells us we're going to go to the hell realms or be born as a pussycat or like an ant or something. So we simply just have a panic attack. We freeze and have a panic attack. The only purpose for it, I mean, it's a practical one, like those advertisements, or like the doctor showing you a movie of somebody who's got lungs, cancerous lungs, as a result of smoking. It can be really effective. It can be the wake-up call that'll cause you to simply stop smoking. So we've got to ask ourselves, why then? Why can't we, if we do think about this, because it's in the literature, it's all there, it's been around for thousands of years, this view, if it's in the literature and it's all there, the explanations, that if we can think about this, confront it and think about it and try and have a comprehension of the suffering of having that kind of mind, well, then just like with the cancerous lungs, the consequence is not, oh my God, I'm such an evil person and I'm completely terrified. And I'm terrified. So, it's a wake-up call. Okay, then what am I going to do? I'm going to stop causing it. And then we've got to have confidence in karma, sweetheart. We've got to have a really clear understanding of karma. And then also what we don't do is we don't look at our good qualities. I mean, you're a good human being. You practice, you live in your vows, no doubt. You're probably creating masses of virtuous karma, but we don't see that. All we do is see the negative and we freak out. I know people like this, absolutely panic attacks about being born in the lower realms, completely, we just freeze with horror. I understand your point. So I think if we can see it as in a practical way and then think what is, so when I see the cancerous lungs, I see those advertisements about the consequences of driving drunk or driving too fast, the intelligent conclusion would be, I should stop driving fast. I should stop smoking cigarettes. That's the intelligent one. So it's interesting that we can't think that when it comes to this, because that's the only reason to think about it, the only reason. But I think part of the problem is we over-exaggerate our badness. I mean, we all say, oh, I must have been a terrible person in the past. But I think what we don't realize, and now this is the tragedy of ego, we always exaggerate more and think more about the negative. But if we looked at all our good qualities, the fact that you have got a human birth, if you realize how much virtuous karma you must have created just to have a human body, not to mention good conditions in this human life, it would completely blow our minds. We'd be so moved and so humble. But the irony of ego is we are addicted to the negative and we exaggerate our negative. So there's no reason to, sweetheart. We need to be grown up about it and have this general view that everything I think and do and say produces the person I become. And every tiny fraction of any happiness you've ever experienced is the fruit of your virtue. But we forget all that. We only think of the negative, So then why not think another way and look at the advantages of being a human? Look at the advantages and think, I'm going to create the causes for that. Because you're in charge. No one's going to punish you. This is not reward. It's not punishment. We are the boss. We are in charge. We can make the decisions. And if we have any faith in the Buddha and these teachings and out of our lamas, they've got very different, I mean, Tibetans have very different style. They act it sounds very fundamentalist. I mean, Lama Zopa is a typical example, some of his courses when he first gave the hippies in the 1970s, 3 of his 4 weeks, he'd be describing in detail each of the hells. I mean, it's like, it was complete uproar among all the Western hippies because it's like so shocking to hear this. But the only reason the doctor would show you those videos is to with compassion, to get you to realize, to cut this habit of smoking, which we're so addicted to, when we realize the consequences to ourselves. It's not guilt. It's not punishment. It's like self-respect. That's the attitude we need to try and have, and that we are in charge. So we can choose to create virtuous karma. If you just alone even realize the power of just living in your vows. I mean, you need bucket loads of virtuous karmic seeds in your bank vault at the time of your death. Well, just living in vows. Lama Zopa says 24 hours a day that you're keeping your vows purely. You are ticking over virtuous karmic seeds and you're putting atomic bombs under your negative karma. So it's like already you're ahead of the game. Already you're doing so much virtue, but we don't think about that. We just think of the negative. So it's really important to get a bigger picture, you know, and feel like a grown-up, feel like you're in charge, sweetheart. That's my advice. Yes, Olive. Unmute, darling.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can, darling.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering how the process of death works, in terms of the phases and also in terms of throwing karma when death is like sudden, especially if it's like
Sweetheart,
violent.
are you going to be able to come to tomorrow's classes? It's a different time for Australia, isn't it? Difficult.
I'm
what time?
15 hours ahead of you, I believe.
well,
So I haven't looked it up yet, but I'll try.
Another way, I know. So then we're going to go into detail about this. We're going to go into detail about the death process, and we're going to talk about the different scenarios. What happens if you die suddenly? What happens if you die, you know, at home, at hospital, different things. So, I mean, if you can come to some of them, it's going to be difficult, I know, because for you now, you're Perth, aren't you? That means
Yes.
You're like 11 a.m. And we're going to start the classes in the morning. So it'll be in the middle of the night for you. It'd be difficult. Maybe you have to listen to
I'll probably still come anyway.
Oh, well, what, darling?
I
Good.
can make
But I mean,
it.
there's like, of course, this is what I'll say. It's certainly here. The ideal way to die is die slowly. So you can be ready, be prepared. That's the ideal, the absolute ideal. So to die suddenly, of course, because you could be sitting there eating your dinner and suddenly get angry, and then you can just drop dead, and this dying suddenly wouldn't be so cool. And of course, it depends on how your mind is. But again, it's also the same as like car accidents. It's not as if you get kind of 3 miles ahead, you get a sign, you're going to crash in 3 miles, get ready. No, crashes come out of the blue. So you got to be ready. I mean, this is the thing. It's the reality is crashes happen suddenly, and reality is some people die suddenly. All the more reason to be conscious and aware every day and live in our vows and live in our practice and feel that we are ready, you know. Do you understand, darling? It's the best you can do. The best you can do is that.
I'm wondering about suicide as well. I've had actually a lot of people ask me about
all of this, I understand, darling. We have to talk about karma to understand this one, but we'll discuss it here because, you've asked it. We're going to go to karma, especially tomorrow. But the thing is with karma, every action we do, there's some of those actions are what they call complete actions. And a complete action is one that leaves a seed in your bank vault that will be one of the seeds that will be triggered at the time of your death, which will be the one that will cause your future rebirth. So a complete action, I mean, in this case, killing yourself, killing, so that it'd be the action. So there's 4 things usually. In this case, it's you're the object, but the crucial piece really in it, and everything we do, it's the same, is what's in your mind. And there's 2 things in your mind. The 4 things that have to be in place when you do a complete action. Technically, suicide is not a complete action in the sense that it's not another person, it's you. But the first one has to be the object. In this case, it's you. The second one is your mind involved in that action. And this is the crucial piece. And there are 2 parts there. One is the intention, not motivation, but the bare bones, I will kill myself, or whatever words you have. And it's often not as conscious as that because we're so often in such despair. But the other point, the crucial piece, is the motivation, the reason you're doing it. So I mean, my feeling is, by looking around the world and talking to people and reading about things, I would suggest the reason most of us want to kill ourselves and do kill ourselves is not out of joy, is not out of love and compassion and delight. It's out of despair and hopelessness. And this is not criticism. I mean, do you understand my point? So that itself is what makes the action, because any negative state of mind is related to ego, and that when the mind is despairing, angry, depressed, it's very grasping, it's very tight, and that by definition triggers a negative seed to be at the time of death. So you can't ever say for sure unless you're clairvoyant, but the motivation is really despair, and you do the action, and then you die. So now, of course, these days there's lots of talk and more and more and more and more and more approval of it all over the world, of people legally killing themselves, or being illegally being supported to die, And of course, we talk about having the right to do it, and of course we have the right to do it. Of course, we are in charge of our lives. We have the right to do whatever we want. But as His Holiness said one time, in relation to some other question, but in relation to this, of course, you have the right. But any action you do, the right comes along with the knowledge of the consequences. So the Buddhist point of view is you need to look carefully, if you take the Buddhist view, of what it is that determines your next life and what it is at the time of death that will be the trigger for the negative or positive karmic seed. So from that perspective, then the Buddhist view, of course, would say it would be really foolish of you to kill yourself because it's only going to bring you a suffering result. Now, of course, most people who kill themselves don't have a view of reincarnation. They have a view of a black hole, you know. So, of course, the Buddhist view is we'll all reincarnate. So it would not be advisable because the motivation would not be a joyful, blissful one. Now, I can imagine, let's say, a person deciding to stop. I mean, these days, you know, you're able to stop taking the food, stop taking the medicine. You're able to prolong your life. There's so much more we're capable of doing these days. But I could imagine a person with a very happy, compassionate mind deciding there's no point in my continuing to live and no need to feed me anymore, no need to give me medicine. Let me just die naturally, which in a sense is agreeing you're going to die. But I can imagine that done with a very joyful mind. And if you've got a practice, that can be very compassionate. So it's all a question of the motivation, darling. That's what determines the karma that is created and therefore the future result. That's the issue every time. Do you understand, Olive?
Yes, thank you.
Good, darling. So Vicky, sweetheart, yes.
Yes, Venerable,
Good, darling.
thank you.
Happy to see you. Good, Vicky.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be able to hear this.
Good.
I'm wondering if I have a wrong view, a strange view, when I think of the hell realms, and I think, oh, I must have been there before, maybe countless times. Surely if I had to do that, I could do that again, though, of course, that's not what I'm aiming for.
I understand, of course, darling. No, okay. I understand. It's an interesting point, but I feel it's like saying, you know, it's like, I mean, like, yeah. I mean, yeah, no, we don't learn from our experiences. I think no matter how many times you hurt your finger, you keep it. You still don't like it. It's not as if you got used to hurting your finger. It's not so bad anymore. It could be possible. It could be possible. But I think the thing is, I think let's just talk about the lower realms for a minute. Talk about these realms, you know, because it's really such a shocking concept for us who've been brought up as materialists, you know. And the other thing is the shocking part, and this is the part for the earlier person who wanted to be anonymous. I think when we think about these things, because we're so used, if we've been brought up in religion, and I was brought up a Catholic, we brought up in the creator religions, which is mostly the major religions, they posit a creator. So what's a creator? A creator is a boss, and then a creator punishes and rewards. So this whole philosophical view of punishment and reward is very primordially deep in our minds. So I think, and this whole thing of I'm a bad girl, I must have been bad, I'm a good girl, I'm a bad girl, guilt, punishment, reward, it's such a heavy philosophical view and a psychological view. But in the Buddhist view, there is no view like this. And that's why the Tibetans can be so naked in their understanding and fear of the lower realms. They realize they're not going to be sent there. It's not punishment, but we hear it as punishment. And that's the part that makes it so heavy. And then we have all this heavy, heavy guilt. It's not your point yet, but I'll get to yours. And this is just not the point. It's just like the one about cigarettes. No one's going to give you cancer because you're a naughty girl. No one's going to forcefully drive over you when you're drunk. You do it to yourself. That's the view that I was trying to say before. When we can take responsibility, that's the person I mentioned the point before. Then we really have more accountability and responsibility, and we grow up and we take the lesson from it. That I don't want that future suffering, so I can stop creating it, not feeling I'm going to be punished. So now let's look at the experiences of these. Basically, all the realms of existence are just states of mind that come along with certain levels of physicality. So in the Vajrayana, I find it very helpful to understand. We're going to go into the death process, and it'll be the Vajrayana model tomorrow. Yeah. That we're all, you know, every being in the universe has got a mind, and that mind is inextricably linked to each of our own set of the four elements. The physical world is made of the four elements. That's it. And every mind is inextricably linked to their own set of the four elements. And this is very powerful. So like Lama Zopa said one time, you know, so, okay, now before Lama Zopa, we've got gross, we're going to go into this with the death process. We've got gross consciousness, which is inextricably with this gross bag of bones. This is the body, which is the senses. Now, when that ceases, we've got the subtle consciousness, which is our mental states. And they run through the 72,000 subtle channels of our subtle nervous system, linked inextricably to their own wind energies. I always quote this. So when you go to your Tibetan doctor, she'll feel your wind, she'll feel your pulses, and she'll feel the imbalance of certain wind energies, and she'll know that's the wind connected to your attachment. That's why you're having panic attacks. So then, you know, the body and the mind are intimately connected. So, as Lama Zopa says, this is karma. Even just having angry thoughts, that first of all programs your mind with anger, but at the same time, it pollutes those wind energies connected to your anger, which in turn karmically create the cause to be born in a sick body. And then even more long-term, karmically create the cause for the imbalance of the external elements. So the entire universe, the physical world is the 4 elements, all the environments are the 4 elements, and the configuration of those 4 elements is due to the karma of the sentient beings who experience those 4 elements. So all beings are like that. So you've got the humans, and we've got our environment. Then you've got the gods. Now the gods are beings who, due to lots and lots of virtue, of being really nice, good people, not necessarily spiritual, but moral, ethical, that purifies their minds, which purifies their wind energy, which creates the cause for them to be born in bodies of light and to have blissful, joyful experiences that last a long time. So, of course, the difficulty with the God realms is that's what people call heaven and paradise, and you think you found the end result. But no, you're still in samsara, and it'll all run out. Your petrol tank of morality will run out, and you're back to the lower realms. So now what's the lower realms? Well, they're all mental states. So the 3 lower realms are mainly expressions of the 3 root delusions. The animal realm, and we're more similar to the animal realm in the way we're made. Look at us with these bags, we look like a bunch of apes, you know. Very similar, but the difference is the animals, because of very strong ignorance, their predominance of intense ego grasping and ignorance, and so the suffer, and their minds too are conjoined with their wind energy, and that produces the body they get due to their past karma, whether it's a crow or some kind of colored bird or a lion. I mean, look at a lion. You can see a lion's mind, this powerful body with claws that are ready to rip the guts out of buffaloes, and a mind that goes with that kind of body. So who created that? The lion, from past aggression, past killing, so that, you know, so that we create ourselves. And so the point is this. Then next one, you've got the spirits. So they've got subtle air bodies, you know, the predominance of the air energy, and their minds are conjoined with air, and their main suffering is unbelievable attachment and grasping. And then you've got the lowest realm, the worst suffering of all, the mind. Probably, I'd say, you could argue the hell realms, their minds are conjoined with the fire energy, you know. Okay. And that's the violence and anger. So now the point is, like the person before, we can't stand thinking about these things, but I mean, it can also generate incredible compassion if we can understand the minds, but we don't even understand other human beings' minds. I mean, I'll never forget, Lama Zopa said, and this is shocking to us, if just for a moment we could have a direct experience of the mind of our cute little dog, whom we think is so happy, so divine, a happy little dog, we can't see anything. So if we could have a direct experience of that mind, Lama Zopa says the suffering of that mind, he meant the mental suffering of the unbelievable ignorance, so therefore unbelievable fear, it would be so horrific, we couldn't even bear to waste another precious moment of this precious human life. So for me, to hear about it, like watching that video of the cancerous lungs, when we realize it's not punishment, you go, who wants to be that? Right. I mean, this energizes us. And of course, it's unbelievable suffering, Vicky. So I don't think it's possible to bear the suffering. Because, I mean, look at the miniature suffering we have now with a human mind and a human body. We find it unbearable, you know. So, I mean, even if we can't think of spirits, my feeling is, even if you can't think of spirits and hell beings, this is another point, not your point again, but for the other person, I think it's evident there are lots of other beings. So the ants, the cockroaches, the birds, the worms, the slugs, the rats. I mean, think about, this is not your point anymore, Vicky. I mean, you're happy with
That's
what I
okay.
did? Whatever. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I think
Oh, yes, yes.
all you got to do is look at a rat. And instead of being horrific, oh, I can't be born as a rat, think of what it would be like to be a rat. I mean, look at the karma. There's a type of karma we have that's called experiences similar to the cause, and it's the way we're seen and treated by others. Well, all I know is just the word rat in English is enough to freak us all out. And when you just see a rat, I mean, people have mental breakdowns, and the first instinct is to want to smash the person to death. So can you imagine walking out your house and whoever looks at you screams in horror and smashes you to death? I mean, who'd want to be living like that? So then you should think, well, I wonder what a rat did to be seen that way. And that's the learning from it. I don't want to be treated like that. Thank you for showing me how not to be rat. So that's the way we use the lower realms, not out of fear, not out of panic, not out of feeling we're being punished, but out of a learning. Like anybody, any human being, you see a maniac human being, thank you for showing me how not to be. I don't want that kind of suffering. It's a way of empathizing as well, you know. So anyway, that just chatting away here, Vicky. I know it's more than your question, darling, but there you go. Whatever. Thank you, Vicky. So I don't think so. Of course, we've all been countless rebirths. I mean, if Buddha's right, our lives are beginningless, which sounds hilarious to us. We can't get our head around that at all. Then, of course, we've had all of the experiences. Anyway, go on, people. What other questions are there? Anybody? Any questions at all, sweethearts?
Thank you, Venerable.
Good, Vicky, darling. Thank you so much. What other questions are there, people? Any more in the box there? Kate, good Kate, talk to me. Talk to me, sweetheart.
Hello. Thank you so much, Venerable. I am actually a retired hospice nurse.
Oh,
And for
how
those
is it?
asking,
Wonderful. Talk to me.
those asking about, fear of death, I've only seen for many years, only
Yes.
very few people that were very distressed at the very end. Most people
That's
do
wonderful.
find that peace and
And that's
what
probably
we
because
call
you've had kind people like you help them, darling. That's the miracle, I think, of having somebody, even one person being kind to you at that time is so precious, you know.
It
So I
is.
think that proves to me the benefit of being there to support somebody, giving them love and kindness at that time, which must have been your job, right?
It was. Now I'm actually now into my own, I had to retire because I have my own terminal disease. So this talk is just a blessing to me, and I want to thank you very
mate.
much.
So you're getting ready for your own death, are you, Kate?
Yes, I have ALS or MND. So I'm a slow progressor. So each day is,
Yeah.
I wake up and I'm still here, and it's a good thing.
That's it, darling. Yes.
So it's really working on attachments for me
That's
going
it.
through, but I have a hard time with thinking about rebirth. Is like, I'm tired of suffering.
No, that could be an energizing one. I mean, that's the point. The very first level of realizations we need is to recognize the suffering, and with a healthy attitude, I'm sick of this. So, honey, child, keep working on it. You know, and if you really purify your mind to that degree, you might just create the cause to get. But I mean, on the other hand, you've got the compassion wing, which means that you want to be reborn out of benefit to others. That's up to your compassion. So this depends on the levels we're at, darling. But you feel like you're doing a good job, Kate? You've got support, you've got good approaches to these things, or you're just looking around looking for approaches to these things? What?
I'm actually have been in a CB course. I was studying Zen before.
Yes.
And I found that Tibetan is actually more my heart in some ways.
Okay.
And
Okay.
teachings are very founding and feel very right to me.
Yes.
So I've been doing CB. I did the compassionate course. I'm trying to teacher training. So I'm just trying to do a lot to process through, to take care of the attachments.
That's it,
I also
darling.
have a YouTube channel now that talks about my daily process with other people. So I just want
to support. You've got close friends and loving, kind, good support.
I have so much support.
This is
If
so
you look at that, it's so beautiful. It really is.
You're very fortunate, Kate. I mean, you've given it to other people all your life, and now people are going to give it to you. This is really the most precious one. Until we're high, I mean, the Buddhist, the Tibetan Buddhist approach, the greatest yogis who are, they say, leave them alone. They know what they're doing because they're really on the case. But most of us are not the greatest yogis, and we do need support. And I think your example is so perfect that it shows. I mean, I even think of sometimes those old people's homes where the poor old person is drugged out of their brain with no one to turn to. Even just a cleaning lady can be so loving and kind. One human being touching you, one human being looking at you and giving you courage is such a special gift, because it can be very fearful, the time of sickness and death, especially if there's a lot of pain, isn't it, Kate?
There is some pain, but I had a cold, and because of my breathing with MND, it was like, it's really trying to breathe. And then I realized if I couldn't breathe, it's okay.
My goodness, you're very brave.
Yeah.
So where do you
It's
live?
just-
Kate? Where do you live?
Houston, Texas.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I really, so have you seen Lama Zopa's book? I mean, get the course notes from this course, and that's extracted from that book. You'll see, you know.
I wrote it down. I'm going to buy it.
Good, fantastic. Good, darling. Wonderful, Kate. You're doing a great job. I admire. Well done, girl.
Thank you. I appreciate
Good.
you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much. Who else would like to ask something? Anybody? We've got 15 minutes. We've got lots of time tomorrow, but for the Australians, no good. Unless Olive wants to get up early, like the English, they're up early today, up late at night. So, yeah, there's two major approaches. There's the actual one of the death process itself, but the other one is learning to live your life. It's clear, you know. You can't just wait till you die, because I mean, the way you live your life, your practice and what you do, and that's a powerful way to karmically create the cause, you know, to have a good death. Because even the way you die, even the situation you die in, that's due to your karma as well. So if you've been loving and kind, like Kate, taking care of dying people, she's absolutely created the cause for herself to really have a very conducive death, and a death surrounded by loving, kind people, which is so incredibly fortunate, you know. So therefore, so then, you know, often we fear that we'll have no one at the time of death. But if we live our lives well, you know, karma is not just something fixed in stone. The way you do, what you act and what you think and what you do produces the future. So if you want, you know, to have a peaceful death, then live a peaceful life, live a loving life, take care of people. This is guaranteed. Not, you don't do it out of a selfish reason, but it's kind of karma takes care, you know. So what we're going to do tomorrow, then we'll go through the first bits, just touch on the first bits of the book. And then really we'll just go through the various kind of the scenarios, what to do the weeks and months before, what to do the days before, the hours before, at each stage. So of course, Lama Zopa's book is full of all these Buddhist practices, but that's something that's really kind of, I think I've found doing courses all over the world using this book. Lots of people come who aren't Buddhist because people appreciate the Buddhist approach, you know, and then also even people for their animals. It's really, people want to know how to help their animals. We've got to do more of those courses. Love the idea that you can help your animal at the time of death, you know, and after death as well, but also how to, what was I going to say? I forget what I was going to say. Never mind. But that's it's just because we want to know, what can I do? Oh yeah, at these courses, I'd have funeral directors coming, non-Buddhists coming, because they want to hear these advices, because it can be something very, especially when people adore their pussycats and their dogs, you know, really want to know advice about how to help your dog and your cat. And it's the same kind of advice. Of course, so, you know, when your pussycat is unconscious, your dog is unconscious, one of the most precious gifts is to be playing mantras, for example. We'll talk about this tomorrow, because you see, when you're unconscious, when you're in a coma, it's like you're in a dream. That's your subtle mind, and your subtle mind can be very conscious. Your subtle mind can be very, when you're in a coma, even then we often think, oh, well, there's grandma in a coma, but she can be conscious of everything that's going on. This is not uncommon, you know, like all the people who report out of body experiences during their operations. They're unconscious, but their subtle mind is aware. So they have this vivid awareness of what is happening. People during dreams can have that as well. So this is one of the things with your pussycat and your dog. Make it peaceful. This is one of the major points. Make it peaceful. And this is why, with all due respect to kind doctors and nurses, a hospital is about the worst place to die. I mean, because it's so noisy. It's so, the clanging and the noises, other people suffering and doors banging. The ideal is a totally quiet place. For example, in the book, Rinpoche talks about, you know, I mean, because a person who's sick for months, living in that sick bed, living in that room, you know, it can be nothing more depressing than a sick room cluttered with things, the curtains closed, all kind of horrible. The most marvelous way to die. I mean, this is, you know, as Rinpoche says, the room should be beautiful. A friend of mine, a nun, the same age as me, always reminds me of it. You know, two nuns, both the same age as me, both born in the year of the monkey, 1944. Both have died of cancer, you know. So it reminds me. So one of them, Trisha, spent years and years and years in India, like 60 years in India. And she was the director of our center in Bodh Gaya. And she was in Australia visiting family. And she suddenly went to the hospital and she had this virulent cancer. So she contacted Lama Zopa. He said, yeah, well, you're going to die, so you might as well stay in Australia and die there, you know. So she lived a couple of months. So she had to find a place to die. So she found this place near our centre in Chenrezig, near in Queensland, this beautiful place with a big, a spacious, expansive view of the sky. It was beautiful, with images, with lovely flowers, sweet smells. This is the ideal, because when you're sick and old, or sick and young, and you're in your bed, you need the mind to be spacious. So to have rooms full of junk and rubbish and curtains closed is the worst thing to do. Make it beautiful. Make the room beautiful with no junk in it. Make this with the sky so the mind can be open and spacious. Because when you're sick, your mind's already sensitive. And as you're dying, your mind gets incredibly sensitive. So that, and because we have senses, we forget this. We've got senses, you know, and the senses are so powerful. So just to have things that are pleasing, every time the sick person opens their eyes and they see the images of the Buddha, for example, it's pleasing for their mind. It leaves a karmic imprint. But if they open their eyes, they see clutter. It's distressing. These things are so practical. And then it should be peaceful. I remember one course on death, one woman said she was on the Saturday, she was saying how they were taking turns taking care of their friend. And, you know, she'd be asleep a lot. And so they'd have Patsy Cline music. She had the dogs and the cats and people all gossiping and chatting, you know. And then we were talking about making the place peaceful. Because this is the point, before I get to the final bit of the story. This is the thing about attachment. You see, we don't understand attachment in the West, with great respect, but attachment energy is so subtle, so fierce. Attachment wants to hold on to something. So naturally, the objects of the senses are so powerful. So if you've got, you know, a person's got a lot of fear about death. And so that's why, for example, in old people's homes, I hear they play television day and night. We think, oh, it's distracting them. But if you're old and you're sick, this is one old lady I went to visit who had cancer. They have the television on all day. So attachment will hold on to anything. It will grasp at anything. And then people talk about how they can't let go. That means you can't let your attachment calm down. Well, this woman, they would have the television on all the time, and attachment will hold on to anything it wants. But this is the worst thing you can do. So this lady, talking about the Patsy Cline music and the dogs and the cats and the people, when she had her roster the next day, Sunday, she turned off the Patsy Cline music. She put on mantras. She kicked out the dogs and the cats. And the woman died in about an hour because her mind was, you gave her a chance to calm down. This woman I was helping in California was really distressed about dying. You could tell, you know, and the television on all the time. And she liked Lama Yeshe. So I left them before videos, the older version, you know, with a tape to put into the machine, into the computer of Lama Yeshe. And they told me later that they couldn't get the television working. So the television broke. So she was left in peace. She died in an hour. It doesn't always mean it's good to die then, but just the mind has to be peaceful. You've got to have whatever sounds going on in the room. Let's say it is a Buddhist. You have sounds that energize their mind and calm them down and help them. But if it's someone else's gossip and chatter in the family, it could look nice, but it's just energizing their attachment and causing them to be not able to be part of, not internally content, you know. So it's so important, these things. The external is very important, you know. We'll talk about all this tomorrow. I remember, I'm talking about the mind being more subtle and being conducive to hearing things. A friend of mine, I always tell this story, an old friend of mine in Sydney, she was in the ER. She was in a deep coma. And she wasn't a Buddhist, but she knew many lamas. And she had them stay in her house, and she was very close to them. And so I'd asked 2 of these lamas, students, to get the lamas to pray for Judy. So when I'd go to see her at night, it was a long way from the center. It was about 50 miles from where I lived, the other side of Sydney. Sydney's a big city. And I went at nighttime because you could drive more quickly then. It was easy, you know. So it was like, so I'd go at night. And I remember her husband rang the hospital, said, can I come and see her every evening in the ER? I'm her spiritual mentor, they said. I was a Buddhist nun. And then when I got there, they were a bit nervous. They said, oh, please don't play any bells. I said, I promise I won't play any bells. So I just sat there with Judy. She was wired up, completely unconscious. And I'd just say prayers in her ear, like the King of Prayers. And every now and again, I'd say, Judy, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying for you. Well, she came out of a coma weeks later, and she said the only thing she could remember was this husky voice. She didn't know it was me. This husky voice. She thought it was a blue lady coming through the window saying Judy, His Holiness Sakya Tenzin's praying for you. Judy, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. The only thing she could find in her mind. Now, I mean, that for me is proof of the pudding, you know. A friend of mine, Jeffrey Hopkins, a professor, you know, Jeffrey Hopkins, a professor. He got Lyme's disease years ago, and I interviewed him in Mandala in 1995 about it. And he said he was in this deepest coma, and the only thing he could find in his mind was one mantra that his Lama had always said, never forget this mantra. He always thought that saved him, you know. So these things at the subtle level have a very powerful effect. So having sound, mantra, holy music, very peaceful for a person in a coma or close to death or sleeping even. Your animals can help them incredibly, you know. So just because a person's in a coma, or we drug them out of their brain. I'm not trying to be rude, but often we say, oh, don't they look peaceful? I'm sorry. They're thrashing and tossing and turning, you know. It's got to be a peaceful environment. So important, such a precious gift to people. To give them a chance, because it's so personal. I mean, they're going through it can't be more personal, can it, death? You know that there's nothing on the planet can help you but you and whatever you rely upon, like your spiritual teachers or the Buddha or Jesus, whoever it is, you know. So incredibly personal, dying. I can't imagine. Just hope I'm ready for it. But the help is so precious, like Kate was doing for people. So marvelous, you know. What else, darlings? 5 more minutes. Anything else? Sweet people? Well, I think it's enough. So tomorrow we'll go through the different things, we'll go through the different practices. But the key one is, the broader point for me is this one, knowing that the mind has got these subtle levels, knowing you can help the mind at a subtle level, having the condition to be there to helping and just like I say to Kate, when there's a lot of fear, just the person knowing that you're there, relying upon you, it's like incredibly precious. You know yourself. I find this very helpful. You know yourself when you're really anxious and worried about anything. You desperately want to turn to somebody. The first thing we think of, isn't it, is whom can I turn to? And the thing that is most precious is just having a person there. And this is the thing that I find interesting. You know, when you're a child, this I find such a powerful example. When you're a little girl and something happens and you have a complete panic attack, don't you? And if you're lucky enough to have a nice mother, you make a beeline for mummy and you look up into her eyes and you're crying like the whole of the world has collapsed. Mummy, mummy, and you tell her what happened. Look what your mother says. All she has to do is say, oh, darling, it's all right. And guess what? You believe her. Can you see my point? You don't have to, you see, we think I've got to solve everybody's problems. No, just be there and listen and make the person feel there's someone holding them. This is the precious gift. Just love the person. Just love them, you know, show them you're there. Take their hand. Suddenly you feel that human connection when you have fear and you calm down, you know. It's very powerful. You don't have to have all the miracle answers in your head. No, just be there as a human being. This is the most precious gift for your pussycat as well, and your dog. Because your dog, you see, think of your dog. Your dog adores you. So that reliance upon you can be so good for your little dog's mind when it's dying. Because if you're there with your little dog, even though it's in pain, it feels secure, you know. It feels secure because you're there to help it. And this is the one about animals. I mean, with respect to our animals, we love to knock off our animals. We call it putting them to sleep and God knows what. But somehow, you know, the Buddhist view, we'll talk about this more tomorrow. If we have so much fear of the suffering, that's often one of the reasons we can't cope. So we put our little doggy to death. But if we have less fear of the suffering, we know we can be so much benefit to your little dog to help it navigate that pain and to help it die peacefully and even get a good human rebirth, you know, next life. This is the Buddhist approach, of course, you know. So there's many approaches to this. So we'll talk more tomorrow, darling people. So let's hope we go to bed tonight. And if you're going to die, then please have a happy mind. You're going to die one day. So then if you're going to have a happy mind, one thing I do, there's a prayer. We'll talk about this tomorrow as well. There's a prayer called from Tsongkhapa, the prayer to be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. There's another whole discussion, Pure Lands. We'll discuss it. But when I go to sleep, I hit my head on the pillow, and I turn on my iPad and I play this, me reciting it. this prayer to be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. I'll talk about that tomorrow. So do something when you go to sleep. You say a little prayer, go to bed peacefully, think if I'm going to die, may I get a good human rebirth, whatever words you make are useful for you. This idea of rebirth, if it's not weird to you, But die with a happy mind and delight in your good day. And if you wake up in the morning, first thing, notice, wow, I can't believe it. I didn't die yet. Make the most of today. Another day, another bonus, think like that. So assuming we're not going to die today, I will see you tomorrow, dearest people. Thank you, everybody. Much love. Good night.